Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of Survival Tips for Parents Raising Anxious Kids. My name is Natasha Daniels. I'm a child therapist. I specialize in anxiety and OCD. And I'm also the mom to 3 kids with anxiety and OCD. And this series is a collaboration between myself and the Made of Millions Foundation. Today, I want to talk to you about your own anxiety. And I think this is a really important thing to talk about because often the apple does not fall far from the genetic tree, which means that a lot of us who are raising anxious kids have our own anxieties, or our partners have their own anxieties. And that's not a coincidence. It's because there's a highly genetic component to anxiety. So I wanted to take this episode to talk to you about your own anxiety because it directly impacts your child in a bunch of different ways. If you're not taking care of yourself, there's no way that you're going to be able to take care of your kids. If you're anxious, your kids will sense that. They're little sponges and they're going to become more anxious. And we don't want that. And our kids can trigger our own anxiety. And we're going to go through all of that and talk about how that happens and what to do about it so that you can be the best rock that you can possibly be while accepting your own issues, your own anxieties, because you're allowed to have your own feelings. You're allowed to feel anxious. That's not your fault. That's not being a bad parent if you're anxious. It's just what do you do about it? So let's get into it. So I want to start with talking about how normal it is that so many of the parents that I work with in my practice and online in my AT parenting community have anxiety. And there is nothing wrong with that. In fact, there are a couple of silver linings to it because when you have your own anxiety, you can be much more empathetic to your kids. You can relate more to your kids because you understand what they're going through. Now, there is a caveat to that where we can swing to the other extreme. So we can over-relate to the point where we over-accommodate. We don't want our kids to have the same struggles that we're having. We don't want our kids to have the same childhood that maybe we had. And so we over-accommodate, we overprotect, and we are there to catch them before they can even hit the ground, which does not help. Because my whole philosophy is to let our kids be empowered and independent, to let them feel the bumps and to walk them through it, because without navigating their own bumps, they're never going to learn how to drive their own car. And it's their journey, not ours, right? So it is really good, though, that you can get your kids, and it's really good that you can understand it, because I hear couples argue all the time in my practice, and a lot of times it's the parent who doesn't have anxiety who doesn't get what I'm trying to say. They sometimes have a harder time empathizing. Sometimes they're stuck in the rational aspect of it where they're like, but it doesn't make any sense. Like, no bad guys have ever broken into our home. I don't understand why he's upset. Nothing bad has ever happened to him. Where the other parent is like, I had those worries too as a kid, so I totally get it. So that is your superpower. We don't want to discount that. Your understanding and your being in touch with your child is super helpful. So let's talk about what to do with the rest of the stuff that maybe is weighing you down. You want to start with knowing your triggers. What are your triggers? Surprisingly, a lot of us have gotten through a big chunk of our lives, decades and decades of it, more decades for me probably, with not really knowing their triggers. What are your core fears? What are the things that drive your anxiety? What things will rev that up? You really have to become super knowledgeable about your own anxiety in order to help yourself and help your kids. And I find it really interesting. I feel like the more work that we do on ourselves, the better we become at helping our kids, because we can't tell our kids to do these things, to work on their anxiety, change their thoughts, do all the coping mechanisms that I'm going to be teaching you and that I do teach people without doing it ourselves. Now, sometimes parents will tell me, don't worry about me, Natasha, I'll fake it till I make it. The focus shouldn't be on me. Let's just focus on the kids. And my message to parents who think that is it's impossible to help your kids to the level that you're going to need to help them without doing your own work. And I didn't start doing my own work, my really intense work, until I was in my 40s and I started to have kids with anxiety. And I realized I can't have them do these things. I can't have them do challenges and exposures and face their fears while I'm not doing that for myself. And partly it's just because I want to model, and we'll get into this, I want to model what it looks like to be an anxiety fighter, an anxiety warrior, and someone who has anxiety, but anxiety doesn't have it. But I also want to be there 110% for my kids. And when I am anxious or when they trigger my anxiety, I can't be there for them 110%. And I have to be able to acknowledge that and know what those triggers are. So the first thing I want you to do, maybe grab a piece of paper, pause this video, and I want you to write down all the things that trigger you and just brainstorm what they are for you. I am triggered by my social anxiety. I didn't realize I had social anxiety until I was in my 40s, and I wrote a book and I created a website, and I wound up having to do a lot of videos and talking to the media and talking to people, and I realized, oh my gosh, I've had social anxiety my entire life. I always thought people just didn't like me. So that would be a trigger for me. And choking, that's a trigger for me. It will look different for you. Fear of throw up, that was a trigger for me. So write those down, and then some of those triggers are going to be just for you, and you can write like a little note on there that says these are my triggers, and some of them are going to be triggers that your kids provoke in you. Some of those will overlap. For me, social anxiety, yes, I have my own social anxiety, but when my kids are rejected or they're made fun of or they're bullied or they're awkward in a social situation, I get super triggered because I over empathize with them, or I'm embarrassed for myself as their mom, or I'm overprotective because I know how it feels, and so it triggers my response. Choking, I don't like to choke, but I also don't like to see my kids choke. And so me cutting their meals in tiny little bites, that's my trigger. Or them trying to take a pill and me being like, are you good? Are you good? That's my trigger. So they can overlap, right? So my kids can trigger some of my anxiety themes, but also I have some anxiety themes that are probably separate, that are not related to them. And you probably do too if you're watching this and you have anxiety. So make 2 columns. What are your triggers, and what triggers are triggers that your kids bring on? And sometimes they may not even be related. You might be triggered when your child says they're refusing to go back to school because maybe last year it was so traumatic for you to get them to school and all of their issues that a lot of parents have some post-traumatic stress from their child's anxiety, depending on how severe it was. And so you can have triggers that are completely in and of itself separate and that are just brought on by your kids because you are predisposed to anxiety. Your anxiety is picking up some new themes, and they might be around your kids' welfare, how your kids are doing, how your kids are doing with their anxiety, all of those things. Okay, so now that you know all your triggers, that's very helpful. Let's go on to the next point. If you know what things upset you, you have to know your limits. And so you have to know parentally when to tap out. So I'll give you an example. I am still not good with the choking thing. I've worked on it. I've stopped cutting their food into tiny little pieces. I've stopped my comments. Very early on, I stopped any kind of comments with like, chew, or, are you okay? I worked on that very quickly because I didn't want to create phobias in my kids, although one child has that phobia, and so, But I do know that I'm still not okay when they take pills. I have a couple of kids who are taking medicines, and when they were learning how to swallow pills, I had my husband do it because I knew that I could not fake it till I make it. My face would just look panicky, and I'd be like, "You're doing great. Are you okay? Take a bigger gulp." And like my anxiety was just all over my face. So I said to my husband, "I can't do it because they're gonna sense my anxiety. Can you handle the pills?" So my second point for this episode is know when to tap out and get your partner to do that part for you if you have a partner to help you, because you've got to know when you're not going to be the rock that you need to be, and it's just better that somebody else handle it all together. Now, in a perfect world, we're working towards learning how to cope and learning how to face our fears so that we can be there for our kids and we don't have to always tap out. But there are times where we're just not going to be able to do it, and you got to know your limits, and that's okay. You're human. So the next step, and the really obvious step, is you have to come up with a plan on how to take care of yourself. So working on your own anxiety is key. You really want to reach out and find a therapist. There's a lot of therapists who can do video therapy, and start to explore your own anxiety. I definitely recommend a cognitive behavioral therapist because you want someone who is going to be able to tackle your anxiety the same way that hopefully you're going to be tackling your child's anxiety or teaching them how to tackle their anxiety. So a CBT therapist is really perfect for anxiety, and I'd recommend that you find one. If you're not open to that, and that's okay, there's plenty of self-help out there that you want to research so that you can find your own help in working through your anxiety. So what do you do to take care of yourself? And you want to make a list of those things, and it's going to look different for each person. It's first being aware of when you're starting to ramp up. I sometimes miss my ramp up point. It like bypasses me, and before I know it, I'm like here and I'm feeling so anxious, I'm feeling overwhelmed. And I know for me, my biggest trigger in general currently, because I've really squashed my social anxiety, is time. I feel rushed. I feel like I don't have enough time. I'm feeling always like crunched for time. And so when that starts to rev up and I'm feeling anxious, and then my kids have something that's going to take my time, I have a small little window before I blow up. So I'm aware of that, and I'm trying to be more aware of catching it before it builds, thinking, okay, I'm feeling panicky, so let me take some pause and say, what can I take off my schedule for today? Or let me just say what things are not going to get done today, because obviously my to-do list is too big and I'm feeling overwhelmed. And then when I do that, I'm more present again for my kids, and I'm less likely to bite their heads off, which I'm sure they appreciate, because I've reduced my trigger. That's how I take care of myself. I am very aware of where my emotions are and where they're headed. And that might look different for you, obviously, as far as what's triggering you, but paying attention to where your anxiety is, how it's growing, and then taking care of it before it starts to grow. So if you are feeling super panicky about something, you're going to have to put everything on pause related to your kids except their basic needs until you take care of yourself. And then you have to go do something, and that's going to look different for each one of you. So what do you do to reduce your stress? And if you don't know, then we have to come up with something. So you want to think about, what can I do to reduce my stress? And not one of those cheesy answers that just, like, let me go take a bubble bath. Unless you love bubble baths and it really calms you down. But something that will genuinely help you on a day-to-day basis. For me, it's reducing my to-do list. That's my number one stress typically. And when I reduce that, my stress goes down. For other people, it might be that they just need to go outside. Maybe they have to take a walk by themselves. Or maybe they have to, if they have a pool or access to a pool, they go swimming. That can be very relaxing for a lot of people. That's actually one of my go-tos. Doing laps is very meditative for me. No matter how bad I feel, if I go and I do some laps, I feel better. So what is that for you? Figure that out. And sometimes it's helpful to just write them down, because even in the moment when you're feeling stressed, you're not going to think about these things. It just doesn't come to people naturally unless they practice this for a long time. So write it down or jot it down on your phone so that when you're feeling stressed, you're like, what are those things that I want to do that can help me feel better? And pick one from the list. Next, I would say make beating anxiety a family affair. I know that sounds totally weird, but we are a family of anxious people, minus my husband. Lucky for him, but genetically it's on his side too. And so we tackle this together. We talk about anxiety. We talk about how, we all have anxiety. We talk about the superpowers of anxiety, how, anxious people tend to be very empathetic, very kind-hearted, very intelligent, very insightful. And so my kids know that we all have superpowers that come with the anxiety that we love, but we also understand that each one of us has our own anxiety themes, and we cheerlead for each other. And so it's a family affair. And so my kids know my anxiety stuff. They know mom with choking, they know my social anxiety. I let them know these things in a very intentional, appropriate sort of way. So I don't vent to my kids, and I don't recommend that when you're doing a family affair that you're venting to your kids and it's a mess. You're still the parent, and you're still the one that's being the anchor and the rock, but you're letting them in to some of your own anxieties. And when you let them in, you also have to partner with that, how you're fighting it, what tools you're using, how you're not listening to your anxiety and you're doing hard things. I do that very intentionally with my kids. I mentioned to them, hey, today I had this huge challenge. This was the thing that I had to do. And my social anxiety was like, no way. There's no way you can do that. And these are the thoughts that I had. And I said, I'm going to do it anyway. You can make me shaky. You can make me nauseous, but I'm still going to do it. And I did do it, and it was okay. So I'll share inspiring stories. I don't want them to, be my confidant. That's not the purpose of it. But there's intention in partnering with them and letting them know that we're all dealing with this together and we're all crushing it together. So lastly, I would say that you want to model using all these tools that hopefully you're getting with your kids. So everything that I teach other kids in my practice and online on how to beat their anxiety, I want my kids to know that I'm using those as well. And so we will use that language together. What's your core fear? What's my core fear? What's your trigger? How do you handle that? I talk about snowball thinking. In my online classes, we talk about red thoughts and green thoughts, and we talk about doing challenges and exposures. And that is something that you want to incorporate and use those tools so that you're modeling that for your kids. So when you get your help and you learn those things, or even if you learn them, like in an online class, I've had a lot of parents who've taken my online classes and they said, they'll email me and they'll say, Natasha, I've started to apply this stuff to myself and it's really helpful. And so they're doing it together. And that's actually even more powerful when you partner with your kids and you say, let's all do this. What's your challenge going to be for this week? This is my challenge for the week. And when I get a red thought, this is how I attack it. I attack it with a green thought. Or when I have snowball thinking, this is what I do. So all the stuff that you're learning that your kids are learning, you can incorporate as well. And if you're learning things, you can help your kids incorporate them as well. So it's just modeling, and it's a positive environment. And when you're feeling overwhelmed and anxious, you tell your kids, I'm feeling really overwhelmed, and so I'm going to go and take a reset. I'm going to go take a reset break. I'm going to go and swim, or I'm going to go take a walk around the block. And you're modeling again healthy coping mechanisms, establishing boundaries, knowing your limits, and doing something that will make you feel better in that moment. So it can be actually a really good thing when you have anxiety, in the sense that you can model these things in real time for your kids. And that's very effective and very powerful when done correctly. Not as a confidant, but when done with intention. So it's not all bad having anxiety. I actually wouldn't change it for the world, because it's really helped me help other people. And it's helped me be very empathetic, because I get it on such a raw level that I can help my kids more than my partner can, because he doesn't get it to the level that I do. And the same thing will probably go for you. So I hope that you find the sparkle in everything you do, and I will be back again in 2 weeks for another episode. Take care.